Hi everyone, my name is Claire and I work at the Surrey Art Gallery. Normally I would be with you in your classroom, but since we can't do it that way, I have got my clay with me in my studio and your teacher has picked up a box for you to work with. I'm wondering before we start, has anybody worked with clay before? You might have used Play-Doh, which is brightly coloured. You might have bought some Sculpey or Fimo from a store. But the clay we're using today, which is like this, it's grey and it's a little bit wet. And I'm wondering if anybody has any ideas about where we get this clay from. If any of you have thought about the fact that it might be underground or have something to do with the soil or sand, then you'd be on the right track. Because clay is made up from tiny little particles of rock that have been ground down over thousands of years. So the rocks get ground down into stones, those get ground down into pebbles, it all gets pressed, and we end up with these very fine little particles that are mixed with water and form a material that we can model with. It's a completely natural material. It comes straight out of nature, and it could go straight back into nature. If we left the things that we had made outside and the rain rained on them, they would not quite dissolve, but they would sort of mix back into the soil. And so it's a material that can be reused. Look at all the objects I have here on this table. They're actually all made out of clay. But they started out the same grey clay that we are going to use today. When it's like this, squishy and wet, and we model it into an object, it's called greenware. If we left it outside in the air and it dried out, all the water in the clay would evaporate. It would shrink a little bit and change colour and get hard but still be fragile. We call this clay bone-dry clay. After that, we could bake it or fire it in a very hot oven called a kiln. And in the kiln, the clay gets transformed. Those little particles weld together. And when it comes out, it's hard like stone. We call this clay bisqueware. What we could do after that is paint it with a glaze. Glaze is like powdered glass mixed with water. If we paint it onto the clay and put it back in the kiln, the heat will melt and harden the powdered glass. And when it comes out, it's covered in a thin skin of glass called a glaze. So clay objects that have been fired in a kiln are called ceramics. And it's likely you have lots of ceramics at home. They're very often useful objects, things we can use to drink out of or eat out of. But sometimes artists use clay to make sculptures for a different purpose. I want you to look at this sculpture by an artist called Jeremy Hatch. Although you can't tell from this picture, Jeremy's tree is really tall. If it was in your classroom, it would reach almost to the ceiling. Look carefully. What do you see? How can you tell that Jeremy's tree is a home? And who is it a home for? We're going to make our own trees, not as big as Jeremy's, but big enough that we can fill them with creatures, plants, and other life forms that might call our tree their home. Are you ready to begin? When you get your clay, we're going to just use these fingers for a few minutes. These are the best tools ever for clay. With these, you can pinch and squeeze and poke. You can break off little bits. You can roll them into balls. You can roll them into sausages. You can make snakes. You can make worms. You can make rainbows. So many things can be done just with our hands. So let's have your teacher hand out the clay now. And while you're playing with it or experimenting with that, let's think about what words we could use to describe the clay. What does it feel like? Is it wet or dry? Is it rough or smooth? What does it smell like? Is it squishy? Is it hard? Is it easy to work with? Okay, I would like everybody to squish together whatever has been going on your table with your clay. Squish it up into a ball, and then we're going to squish it in our hands and roll it a little bit, because we want to make something that is the shape of a cylinder, like a big sausage, but flat at both ends. So we can go tap, 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 and tap, 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 and then roll, 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 tap, tap, roll, roll. We're aiming to have something that's a bit like a giant marshmallow, maybe a squashed pop can, something about this big. We're going to try and make a hole in the middle of our cylinder. To do that, we're going to use our finger, a little bit like a drill. And in order for it to be a good drill, it has to be stiff. If it's a wobbly finger, it's not going to do anything. We're going to keep it really strong and hard, and we're going to press down and twist at the same time. Right? It might help you to stand up so that you can put all your weight on top. You're going to try and keep your finger straight, and you're going to twist and push at the same time. Hold your cylinder with one hand and drill with the other. And you're going to try and drill as far as your finger will go. It might go all the way to the bottom. It might only go that far and not reach the bottom, but you want your finger to go all the way in, because we want that hole to go as far down the cylinder as possible. Twist your finger so that you can pull it out again. You don't want to leave your finger behind in there, but you don't want your hole too big, right? Try that. Everybody's going to get a short bamboo skewer. You can see that it's got a pointy end and it's got a blunt end. Quite often, potters, who are the people who make pots out of clay, might use a tool like this to make patterns in the clay. You can use it almost like a pencil to draw with. They might use this end to make little marks. They might use this end to make patterns as well. So it is a useful tool for making textures on a surface. Right now though, I'm going to erase this with my finger because I'm not going to use it as a pattern or a drawing tool. We're going to use it as a cutting tool. I would like you to place your skewer across the top of your hole. So it looks like that. We're going to use a finger on both sides, and we're going to press down, maybe about a centimeter. So a centimeter is almost the width of your finger. Once we've pressed down a little bit, we're going to pull it out sideways like that. And then we're going to turn our cylinder around, and we're going to place it across the top in the other direction. And we're going to do the same thing. A finger on each side and push down and pull it out. So we've ended up with like a giant plus sign. Keep watching, because I'm going to carry on showing you what we're going to do next. Once you've got that giant plus sign, we are going to pull those little knobs out so that it looks, now it's looking a bit like a stubby flower. But what's also happened is that because we pressed down on the clay, we've shrunk our cylinder a little bit. So we're going to put our finger back in and squeeze a little bit in the middle. We're going to squeeze around so that it grows back up a little bit more, so that we've got our cylinder a little bit taller than it was. To do that, you're just going to squeeze like this. You don't want to block up the hole, so maybe keep a finger in the middle. Make sure you still got that hole down the center, but we're turning and squeezing a little bit so that it grows a bit. Now that we've got these 4 knobs, we're going to see if we can make those knobs grow as well. And there's 2 ways we can do that. We can use our fingers, a bit like one of those machines that comes down and clamps things and then lifts them up. So we could do that. We could come down, clamp a little bit, just very lightly, and then let go again and turn our fingers. We have to keep turning our fingers as we clamp. You could pretend that the clay is red hot and you have to touch it and let it go, touch it and let it go, because it's so hot to touch. Because you don't want to squeeze too hard. If you squeeze too hard and if you squeeze flat in this direction all the time, then you're going to make a pancake. And that pancake is going to get thinner and thinner and thinner, and eventually it'll just break off like this into little bits. So if you're pushing in one direction, you make it super flat. We want it to be round like this. So we have to keep on moving our fingers around and around and around. Your hands are usually smaller than mine, so you could get your whole hand and squeeze those if you like. You could make them go round and round and round with your whole hand using your fingers. But the trick is always keep moving. Don't press in the same direction all the time. You have to keep moving. So we're trying to make, I guess, fingers. They're going to turn into tree branches. So we want them maybe to be a little bit thicker at the bottom, a little bit thinner at the top. And the more we squeeze, the longer we can make them grow. Let's try that. Well, thank you for listening to all those instructions so carefully. Let's ask your teacher to hand out the skewers now. And while your teacher's handing out the skewers, we're going to do a quick recap of all those instructions. Do you remember how we started? You had your cylinder with a hole in it. We're going to use the skewer to make a big plus sign across the top of your hole. Press it down and pull it out. You're going to have 4 little knobs, and those 4 little knobs get pulled out a little bit. Next step, make sure your tree hasn't shrunk too much, so you're going to keep it growing upwards. And then finally, you're going to make those little knobs grow into long fingers. Okay, so by now I'm hoping everybody has a tree trunk, got 4 branches. You're going to need scissors for the next step in the process. Make sure you have some scissors, because right now our tree only has 4 branches. And if you look outside at a tree, or think about maybe the trees that you drew before we started our clay project, that's not realistic. A tree has so many more branches, because on the branches grow leaves, important both for bugs and insects, but also for us, because the leaves enable us to get clean air. So we're going to need more branches. I'm wondering if we could turn these 4 branches into 16 branches. And what would that take? We've got 4. Let's count in 4s. 4 and 4 is 8. 8 plus 4 is 12. 12 plus 4 is 16. So if I divided each branch into 4 branches, I should end up with 16. We're going to try that. So I'm going to point my branch upwards. I'm going to get my scissors, and I'm going to place my scissors right at the top of that branch, like so. I'm going to open the scissors up, put them down the center of that branch, and snip. When I've snipped, I'm going to wiggle a little bit so that I can get the scissors out without breaking the branches, and then I can bend them outwards. I've got 1 branch turned into 2. I can go back again and make them, shape them a little bit with my fingers as we learnt in the last step. And then I'm going to see if I can divide those branches again. So same thing. I'm going to put my scissors on the tip. I'm going to open them up, go down halfway, snip a little bit, and then jiggle and pull my scissors out. Oops! With that one of my pieces came off with the scissors. That's no problem. I can squish it back on again so that it's joined on. I'm going to try again with this one. Put my scissors on top, open them up, snip, and wiggle so that I get them out. Same thing happened again. Never mind. I'm going to stick that one back on there. So I've turned 1 branch into 4 branches. See if you can do that. Certainly you're going to get some branches breaking. It's not a big deal. You can just stick them back on again. What we're doing as artists is we're kind of testing the material. We're saying, how thin can I make these before they break? It's something that all artists do with their materials. What can we make it do before it won't do it anymore? Everybody's going to need some more clay, another block of clay, and a sponge would be useful, a damp sponge. When you have your clay, we are going to break it in half. So use our hands to break it in half. Doesn't have to be exact. We're going to keep half. That's going to be useful later. And this half we're going to break in half again so that we've got a quarter of the original piece of clay. We're going to roll that clay into a sausage. And what we're aiming to do here is make maybe another branch on our tree, or we could add roots to our tree. I'm thinking that we don't pay a lot of attention to roots, but really they are so important for a tree, right? They help the tree stay upright. They collect nutrients, water, and other nutrients from the ground. They share information underneath the ground and resources for other trees. So roots could be really important. Okay, so with that quarter, you're going to roll it into a sausage. And that sausage is going to be about as long as your finger. So you don't want it any longer than your finger. Yours are shorter than mine, but this is good. We could make one end of the sausage a little bit thinner if we just roll one end more than the other end. It's a little bit thinner. And with the other end, we're going to go tap, 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 tap on the table so that one end is flat and the other end is pointy. Right? And then we're going to do the same thing we did with our branches. We're going to divide the end so that we've got either more branches or maybe more divided roots. So I'm cutting this one once, and I'm cutting it again, and I might cut this one a little bit here at this end as well. Right. So I have, that one broke a little bit. I have almost what looks like a mini tree, right? And I want to be able to join that tree onto this tree, right? So I'm joining this branch. I might want to join it there and have it grow up. If I'm using it as a root, I might want to join it right at the bottom, right? So that I can see those roots curling around, right? But wherever you join it, anytime we join clay together, we have to make it grip to that surface. It's a bit like the marks on the bottom of your shoe. They help you grip to the ground so that you don't slide around as though you're on ice. To do that, we're going to do something called scoring. And you could take your sharp skewer and you're going to make really rough lines on the bottom of that branch. You're going to go one way and then you're going to go the other way, like X's and O's, right? But do you see how deeply I am making those scratches? I want them to be really rough so that this branch will grip to my tree. I'm not only going to do it on the surface, I'm also going to do it wherever I'm joining onto. So if I'm joining onto the tree here, I'm going to do it here as well. Now, if you have a sponge, if you have a damp sponge, you can squeeze your fingers on it a little bit and add a little bit of water or dampness to that join. If not, if your clay is still fairly moist, you're good to go. You can just push that straight on. So push hard, and then you can use your finger to make the join where you joined it on invisible. So I'm smoothing out that join where I joined it, and I know that underneath is all that rough surface that will help this branch grip to the tree trunk. I'm going to bend it up a little bit so that it's growing towards the light, so it can collect all that sunlight in the leaves to make food for itself. And then I might use another one, right? I could use this one. I could add another tree trunk on the other side, another branch on the other side, or I could maybe add a root that's growing along the ground out here. Your trees are probably all looking pretty unique by now. I'm sure they're all very different to each other. However, I'm guessing, similar to mine, that they're probably quite smooth. So we're going to talk about texture. Wondering if you can define texture. If you feel the surface of your desk, it would feel very different to rubbing your hand over the gravel outside. In the same way, if we run our hand over the bark of a tree, it would tell us something about what kind of tree that is. Look at the bark I have here. This is an interesting one because it grows all around us here in Vancouver and on the West Coast. It's a very tall tree, and it's got kind of straight lines that sort of go straight up and down. You can see how straight these lines are. It kind of indicates how straight the grain of the wood is underneath the bark. And so because of that straightness, it made it a really good tree for carving. The wood got used by First Nations people for totem poles and canoes, and the bark got used for weaving mats and clothing and hats. So it's a really important tree for Indigenous people and for all of us here on the West Coast. It's called a cedar tree. It's very different to the bark of a Douglas fir tree, which is way thicker and more gnarly and twisted. Look at this bark. This is kind of different. The lines on this bark are going the other way. So instead of going straight up and down, they're going across from side to side. It's almost like its skin is peeling off. And here's a tree that's got a curious amount of holes in it. I'm wondering if you know what made those holes, and if you can guess what kind of tree it might be. So let's look at our tree. We could add a whole layer of texture to our tree using our skewer. So maybe if your tree is a cedar tree, it might have these very straight lines that go all the way up it, that tell us what an amazing wood it has underneath it, right? It might be that it's a Douglas fir tree and it has very, very deeply fissured bark. Maybe you're going to make it a birch tree, and so it would be like that papery bark with little dotted lines that go in the other direction. So you're going to take some time to add texture to your tree, but there's something else we can do. We remember the blunt end of our skewer, and remember how we had a hole in the middle of our tree to start with? Make sure your hole is still there, and then you can use the blunt end of your skewer to stick it into the middle, right? Like so. We're going to stick it in, and then if you turn it around and around and around, make yourself a nice big hole, and then pull it out. You could even use your finger a little bit. We've now got a hole in our tree. I'm wondering what you think might live inside that hole. Let's think about it. And we're going to start talking about our tree as a home for different kinds of animals, birds, insects, bugs, and other plants. By now, I hope you're all sharing your ideas about the creatures that are living in your tree. I know that you've all got the squishy, pinchy skills that you need in your fingers to make just about anything. And I would encourage you to try on your own. But if you really, really are stuck, then I'm going to do a quick demo of ways that you could add to your tree. You might want to stick around so that we make a nest or a bird that's sitting on that nest. You might want to turn your nest into tiny little mushrooms. You might want to be making an owl that lives in that hole in your tree. All right, we're going to make a nest out of a lump of clay. You want a piece that's probably as big as a large marble, and we're going to roll it around and around. You could roll it in the palm of your hand, or you could roll it on the table, but you want it to, the more you roll it, the rounder it'll get. So we're going to roll and roll and roll and roll until we have something that's nice and round. There you go. When you've got a nice round ball, we're going to put it in the palm of one hand, and with our thumb in the other hand, we're going to point our thumb up to the ceiling, and then we're going to bring it around and down so that it dive bombs down into the middle of that ball of clay. We're going to keep it stuck in that ball of clay and push out those two fingers. They're going to get stuck together really firmly because they're going to act like little tweezers, and they're going to come up against your thumb and squeeze. And when you've squeezed and pinched, you're going to lift your ball a little bit and turn and pinch again, and lift and turn and pinch again, and lift and turn and pinch, and lift and turn and pinch. And the more you do this, the bigger your little ball is going to get. You can make it as big as you feel it needs to be as a nest in your tree. You can think about the texture of that nest. What are nests made out of? Twigs and leaves, sometimes feathers, sometimes little bits of moss and lichen, all the things that would make it soft enough to lay eggs in. So you could add lots of texture to your nest, and once you've turned it over, it would be ready maybe for some eggs. If it's got eggs in it, it's definitely going to need a bird to sit on those eggs and keep them warm. But before we make a bird for our nest, I want to show you something else. If we make a small nest and keep it that way up, if I rolled another piece of clay into a sausage, just by going backwards and forwards, and then stuck it in the center of that nest, push it in firmly, and maybe press it down with a skewer, and then have it sticking upright. What has it become? Maybe there would be some other mushrooms growing around the base of your tree. This one would probably be way too big to fit with your tree, but you could make a smaller one. Certainly could make a smaller. This one's got gills on the inside, but a smaller mushroom would possibly fit with your tree. Okay, so let's think about what kind of bird is going to be keeping those eggs warm in that nest. We'll use another piece of clay. This time, instead of rolling a round ball, we'll roll more of a sausage shape. So I'm going to roll backwards and forwards on my desk until I have something that's quite thick, about as long as half your finger. At one end of this, I'm going to make it really pointy. So I'm going to make it pointy by pinching around and around and around so that I've got a beak at the top. And a little bit further down, I'm going to pinch. So I'm going to pinch around and around and around so that I'm making a neck. You can see now that I've got a neck and a head and a beak. I could go ahead and put eyes on my bird. I could give it a mark on its beak. I could turn that beak down a little bit if I wanted to. And what I want to do now is add wings. So I could make those wings separately. I could get 2 other pieces of clay and squish them flat into wing shapes and add them on. Or I could pinch the edges of this body until they're thin and pressed outwards to make some wings. You might want to make a tail for your bird. So at this end, you could pinch a tail. If it's standing upright over its nest, it might need to have some feet that will enable it to perch on the edge of its nest. It's probably looking down over its babies. You can always add more texture with your skewer tool. You could make feathers on the wings of this bird. We're going to use the same shape to make a squirrel. So from your chunk of clay, you're going to take a piece that's about the size of a giant marble, and we're going to roll it into a sausage. This time, instead of making the top pointy, we're just going to go straight to the pinching. So we're going to move around the top of that sausage and pinch a little bit until we've got a head shape. At the top of that head shape, I'm going to pinch 2 little ears for my squirrel. And maybe I'm going to give him some eyes. Got some eyes. And little nose. And then right down at the base of this sausage, I'm going to fold it a little bit, and then I'm going to squeeze that all the way out. So I'm making a big L shape. And once I've squeezed that all the way out, I'm going to fold it up. So it's going to come up the back of the squirrel's back. I'm going to press it in there and then turn the tip over so that I've got a squirrel's tail. Now he's going to need some legs. I'm going to have hind legs coming out of the bottom here. And maybe those little front legs that hold on to acorns, I'm going to pinch out of this part of his body. There you go. I think he needs more of a nose. Give him a little bit more of a nose. And leave him there. He's probably needing an acorn. With this, I'm going to roll a tiny little round ball and see if I can ever so carefully make a line around the top of that ball. I'm going to make it a little bit pointy at one end, and I'm going to make those little dots that happen on top of an acorn. There you go. This squirrel is living in an oak tree, and he's collecting acorns. There you go. If you have nothing living in that hole in your tree yet, we're going to make an owl. Again, we're going to take a piece of clay about the size of a giant marble, and I'm going to roll a round ball. And then when I've got a round ball, I'm going to go backwards and forwards. 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got something that's more oval shaped. And then I'm going to tap it flat so that it's like a kind of a brick. At the top of that brick, I'm going to make 2 ear tufts. They're not actually ears. Owls have ears further down their body, but sometimes they have little tufts. At the bottom of the owl's body, I'm going to pinch out 2 feet. Those feet are going to stick out like this. And I'm going to make sure that those feet have talons so that it can pick up rodents. Now I'm going to give it a face. I'm going to make 2 big eye sockets with my skewer. And into those eye sockets, I'm going to put 2 eyeballs. So I have 1 eyeball and another one, and then I'm going to just drop them in. I'm not going to push them in too hard because I'm going to use my skewer to make sure they're stuck in like so. Next, my owl needs a beak, so I'm going to take another piece of clay, roll a round ball. I'm going to make that ball pointy at one end, and I'm going to go tap, tap, tap on the other end so that I have something that's a little bit like a Hershey's Kiss. And then on the bottom of that, I'm going to make a rough surface because this is something that could fall off very easily. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to score where I'm going to stick that beak on, and then I'm ready to push it on. So I'm going to push, push, push. It's a little bit big, so I'm going to take some of the bottom of it off. Okay. Now I'm going to give the owl some feathers. I'm going to have the feathers go all the way around his face. Maybe on his chest, I'm going to give him some other kind of feathers. These are little chest feathers. Sometimes owls have what looks like eyebrows. It's really just markings. But to do that, I'm going to roll a very long, thin sausage. You can see how thin this is. Don't need it all. And I'm going to put that in a V that goes from one ear tuft down to the beak and up to the other ear tuft, so that the owl has some expression. Next, I could put on wings. We could do it the same as we did for the other bird. We could roll 2 round balls and then squeeze those flat between your fingers so that you have a flat wing shape. We could score those and stick them onto the back of the owl, or we could just take the owl's body between our fingers and between your thumb and index finger pinch out the sides so that you've got some flat wing shapes. And those flat wing shapes can curl over and create wings for your owl. So there you go, another creature for your tree. Your teacher's going to give you instructions about tidy up. But I'm hoping that once you've assembled all your trees in one spot to dry carefully, that you can think about how putting all those trees together has created a forest. And now that you've got a forest of trees, you actually have extra habitat, because there might be animals living between those trees, and there might be other plants growing in between the trees. So you have a whole new rich habitat to explore. Thanks for making trees with me today, and it was great to be here.